Richard Anderson took one last look at the gleaming skyscraper on Wall Street, home to the headquarters of Anderson Investments. 40 floors of glass and steel that for 15 years had been his empire. Now, it was nothing but a bitter memory. His hands shook as he held a cardboard box containing his last personal belongings, a photo with his parents, a Mont Blanc pen he'd received at graduation, and a small Entrepreneur of the Year trophy that now felt like a cruel joke. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but the orders were clear. You can't go inside the building anymore." The security guard spoke with respect but firmness. He'd known Richard for years. He had seen his meteoric rise in the investment world, and now he was witnessing his fall. "I understand, John. You're just doing your job." Richard tucked the box under his arm and walked down the busy sidewalk. Executives in expensive suits rushed past him, talking on their cell phones about millions as if it were pocket change. He used to be one of them. Now he was wearing a wrinkled shirt and dirty sneakers. 3 weeks earlier, his life had fallen apart in a matter of hours. Frank, his younger brother and minority partner in the firm, had orchestrated the perfect coup. Using forged power of attorney and doctored documents, he transferred all the company's assets to offshore accounts, leaving only debts and lawsuits in Richard's name. You were always too confident, bro," Frank had said during their last conversation. "You never imagined I could be smarter than you." The strike was surgical. Frank had spent months preparing everything, hiring specialized lawyers, and creating a network of shell companies. By the time Richard realized what was happening, it was already too late. His bank account had been drained, his credit cards canceled, and his assets frozen by the court. In 3 weeks, Richard went from a penthouse in Manhattan to a rented room in a motel in the Bronx. His BMW was seized, his Hugo Boss suits sold at a thrift store, and his Swiss watches pawned. Of the financial empire he had built, only a backpack with some clothes and $200 in his pocket remained. On that Tuesday morning, Richard was walking aimlessly through the streets of Midtown when the hunger hit. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Just cookies and coffee he managed to buy at the corner deli. He spotted a small diner at the end of the street with an unassuming sign, "Grandma's Kitchen, Home-Cooked Meals." The place was simple, with just 10 Formica tables and plastic chairs. The walls had white tiles that were slightly yellowed with age, and a handwritten sign announced the full daily special for $15. For someone with $200 in his pocket and no income prospects, $15 was a fortune. Richard sat at a table in the corner, trying to look invisible. A woman of about 28 years old approached. She had brown hair tied in a ponytail, hazel eyes, and a tired but genuine smile. She wore a simple uniform, jeans and a white t-shirt with the diner's name embroidered on the pocket. "Good afternoon. Would you like to see the menu?" Her voice was sweet, but Richard noticed a slight southern accent. He looked at the chalkboard hanging on the wall where the dishes of the day were written. "Just a coffee, please." The waitress, her name tag read Mary, watched him for a moment. There was something in his eyes she recognized, the same look of exhaustion and despair she saw in the mirror every morning. "Are you sure? The daily special is really good today. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, salad, and fries. It even comes with sweet tea." "Just the coffee, thanks." Mary nodded and went to get his drink. While he waited, Richard looked around the room. It was simple, but clean. There were plants in makeshift pots, family photos on the wall, and a homey smell that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen. That was when she appeared. A girl of about 6 years old came running from the kitchen in a flowered dress that was a little too big and worn-out sandals. Her curly hair was tied back with a colorful elastic band, and she was clutching a sketchbook against her chest. When she saw Richard, she stopped immediately and stared at him with curiosity. "Mommy, there's a sad man over there." Mary returned with the coffee and sighed when she saw her daughter. "Isabella, go finish your homework. Don't bother the customers." "But he looks sad, Mommy. Maybe he needs a friend." Richard looked at the girl and felt something strange in his chest. It had been so long since anyone worried about him that he had forgotten what that feeling was like. "Hi," Isabella said, approaching the table. "I'm Isabella. And you?" "I'm Rick." The nickname came out automatically. It was what his close friends called him, an irony now that he didn't have a cent to his name. "Nice to meet you, Rick. Do you want to see my drawings? Without waiting for an answer, Isabella opened the notebook to a page where she had drawn a family. A man, a woman, and a child, holding hands in front of a house with a garden. This is my daddy, this is my mommy, and this is me. My daddy works really far away, that's why he doesn't live with us. But one day, he's gonna come back. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Mary walked over quickly. Isabella, leave the gentleman alone. Go do your homework. It's okay, said Richard with a raspy voice. She's no bother. Mary hesitated, then sat in the chair next to her daughter. Sorry, she's a chatterbox. She hasn't learned yet that not everyone wants to talk. No problem. It's been a while since I talked to anyone. Isabella was watching him with those big, curious eyes. Why are you sad, Rick? The child's direct question caught Richard off guard. He looked at Mary, who made an apologetic gesture. Isabella, you don't ask that. But my teacher said that when someone is sad, we should ask if we can help. Richard smiled for though. First time in weeks, a small but genuine smile. Your teacher is right. I'm sad because I lost my job and my house. Just like Mr. Joe who lives under the bridge? Isabella! Mary scolded her, but Richard shook his head. Something like that. The girl thought for a moment, then opened her backpack and took out a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. Mommy made this peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my snack. Do you want it? When I'm sad, eating always makes me feel better. Richard looked at the small sandwich the girl was offering with all the sincerity in the world. He felt tears welling up. Isabella, you can't give your food to other people, Mary said, clearly embarrassed. But he's hungry, Mommy. Look at his eyes. And he was. Richard couldn't remember the last time he had eaten. His stomach ached from emptiness, but not nearly as much as his heart. Thank you so much, Isabella, but I can't accept your food. Because Mommy always says that sharing is caring. Mary looked at Richard, then at her daughter, and sighed. You know what, Rick? If you want to help wash some dishes in the back, I can give you a plate of food in exchange. The guy who usually does it didn't show up today. Richard understood it was charity disguised as work, but his dignity had already taken so many hits that one more wouldn't make a difference. I accept. Over the next 2 months, Richard's routine changed completely. Every morning at 7 o'clock, he arrived at Grandma's kitchen to help prepare breakfast. He washed dishes, wiped down tables, and carried sacks of potatoes and flour, and did small repairs around the place. In exchange, Mary gave him 3 meals a day and $50 a week. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay for his room at the motel and some basic necessities. More importantly, it was the first time in weeks that Richard felt useful. Grandma Rose, the owner of the establishment and Mary's mother, was a 60-year-old woman who had migrated from the rural South 30 years earlier. She treated Richard like a son, always making sure he ate well and rested when he needed to. My son, you have the hands of someone who's never done hard labor. But you have the humility of someone who knows what it means to be in need, she would say while teaching Richard how to season the collard greens. Mary was more reserved. She had been working at the place since she was 16, when she arrived pregnant and without prospects after Isabella's father disappeared. She was a strong, determined woman, but Richard could sense the sadness she carried on her shoulders. Isabella, on the other hand, had adopted Rick as her best friend. Every day after school, she would run to the diner to show him her drawings, tell him about her classes, or simply sit beside him while he worked. Rick, did you know that elephants cry when they're sad? Rick, why do the stars only come out at night? Rick, do you think my daddy will come back one day? Each question was like a small stab to Richard's heart. The girl's innocence contrasted brutally with the hardness of the world he knew. A world where brothers betrayed brothers for money, where contracts were broken, and where trust was a worthless currency. One night, 3 months after starting work at the diner, Richard was closing up when Mary sat down next to him. Can I ask you a personal question? Richard nodded, continuing to wipe the last table. You're not an ordinary person, are you? What do you mean? Your hands, the way you speak, the way you know things that a simple person wouldn't know. Yesterday, you helped Grandma Rose with her taxes, and you knew terms I've never heard in my life. Richard stopped wiping the table. He knew this moment would come sooner or later. Everyone has a past, Mary. That's true, but not everyone runs from it. Who said I'm running? Mary smiled sadly. No one needs to say it. It's written in your eyes. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Richard sat down beside her. What if I told you I used to have a completely different life? That I lived in penthouses, drove luxury cars, and dined at the best restaurants in the city? I'd say I don't care who you used to be. I care about who you are now, and who I am. Mary looked at him with those hazel eyes that made him forget all his problems. You are the man who makes her daughter laugh every single day, who teaches her how to make origami with paper napkins, who stays up late helping. Grandma Rose with the bookkeeping, who works 16 hours a day for $50 a week and never complains. And is that enough for me and for Isabella? It's everything. That night, Richard walked back to his motel with a heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time since Frank's scam, he didn't think about revenge, about getting his fortune back, or proving his innocence. He thought only of Isabella's laughter and Mary's smile. But life has a cruel way of reminding us that we can't always run from our past. The next morning, when Richard got to the diner, he found Mary crying in the kitchen, holding a letter. What happened? The landlord is going to sell the building. We have 30 days to vacate. Richard took the letter. The asking price was $250,000, an impossible amount for people who could barely pay their monthly bills. Does Grandma Rose know? I haven't had the courage to tell her yet. She built her whole life here. It's her dream. And where would you go? Mary wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know. Maybe go back to Georgia. My mom has some relatives there. The thought of losing Mary and Isabella hit Richard like a punch to the gut. In those 3 months, they had become his family, the only good thing in his devastated life. There has to be a solution. With what money, Rick? We earn enough to survive, not to buy real estate. That afternoon, while Isabella was doing homework at a table in the diner, she asked, Rick, why was Mommy crying today? Richard hesitated. He didn't want to worry the girl, but he couldn't lie to her either. She's going through a tough time, just like I was when you met us. Similar, Isabella thought for a moment. Then she opened her backpack and pulled out a little piggy bank. I have $43 in here. It's money I saved up to buy a doll. But if it helps Mommy, she can have it all. Richard felt his eyes burn. That child's generosity touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Thank you, Isa, but keep your money. I'm going to find a way to help your mom. How? You don't have money either. Sometimes we find things we thought we had lost. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked through the city until dawn, thinking about all the possibilities. He knew the financial market like few others. He knew how to move money, how to find investors, how to structure complex deals. But all of that required one thing he didn't have: credibility. That was when he had an idea. Among the few contacts who still spoke to him was Julia Bennett, an investigative journalist working for the New York Herald. Years earlier, Richard had given her exclusive information about a corruption scheme that won her a journalism award. Julia always said she was in his debt. Maybe it was time to call in that favor. The next day, Richard called Julia from a payphone near the diner. Richard, my God, I thought you had vanished from the face of the earth. It's a long story, Ju. I need to see you. It's urgent. Sure, where are you? Midtown. You know Grandma's kitchen? That little diner near the subway? What are you doing there? I'll explain when I see you. Can you make it today? Julia arrived 2 hours later, driving her Honda Civic and wearing a blazer that cost more than Mary's monthly salary. When she saw Richard, bearded, thin, wearing simple clothes, her eyes went wide. Man, what happened to you? My brother scammed me. I lost everything. Frank? I can't believe it. I always thought he was a little off, but I never imagined this. Julia, I need your help. But first I need to tell you the whole truth. For 2 hours, Richard told the whole story. Frank's scam, the forged documents, the shell companies, and his current life working at the diner. Julia was taking frantic notes. Richard, this is a bombshell. If I can prove what you're saying, your brother is going to jail. That's exactly what I want. But I have a condition. What is it? I want 50% of whatever I recover to go into a social fund for small businesses, starting with this diner. Julia looked at him in surprise. Are you sure? We're talking about millions. I'm absolutely sure. That was the moment Isabella came running in from school, backpack still on, holding a drawing. Rick! Look what I made today. The drawing showed a man in a tie. It was Frank, even though she didn't know it, being taken away by police, while a family, her, Mary, and Rick, watched from a distance, smiling. "That's beautiful, Issa. Who's the man in the tie?" "He's the bad guy from the story I made up. He stole money from good people, but in the end, the police catch him and everyone is happy." Richard and Julia exchanged meaningful looks. "And how did the girl in the story find out he was bad?" Julia asked. "Because she paid attention to things adults don't see, like when he told lies on the phone or hid important papers." Richard felt a chill. Isabella had just described exactly what they needed to do: pay attention to the details everyone else ignored. Over the next 3 months, Julia worked tirelessly investigating Frank's scheme. With the information provided by Richard, she managed to track the financial movements, identify the shell companies, and locate the offshore accounts. Meanwhile, Richard continued working at the diner, but now with a clear purpose. He needed to keep up appearances until they had enough evidence to expose Frank. Mary noticed the change in his behavior. "You seem different," she said one night while they were closing up the diner. "What do you mean?" "More hopeful, like you know something you're not telling me." Richard almost revealed everything right then. But he knew he had to wait. If Frank found out he was investigating, he could destroy all the evidence. "I'm just thinking about the future," he answered vaguely. "Rick," Mary called out to him just as he was about to leave, "I want you to know that these last few months have been the happiest of my life in a long time." "Mine too. Why?" "Because you two reminded me of who I really am and who you are." Richard smiled and gently caressed her face. "Someone who didn't know he could truly love until he met you both." They kissed right there in the middle of the empty diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and Isabella's drawing stuck to the wall. It was the sweetest kiss of Richard's life because it was the first one given without hidden agendas, without calculations, without plans. It was pure love. The next day, Isabella noticed that something had changed between her mom and Rick. "Are you guys dating?" she asked directly during lunch. Mary blushed and Richard laughed. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" "Because you keep looking at each other and smiling for no reason, just like in Disney movies." "And what do you think about that?" asked Mary. Isabella thought seriously for a moment. "I think Rick could be my new daddy. He's way better than the old one, who I don't even know." 2 days later, Julia called with news that would change everything. "Richard, I finished the investigation. I have enough evidence to arrest your brother and recover all the money." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. But there's one thing I need to warn you about. The story is coming out tomorrow on the front page. In 12 hours, all of America will know you're alive and that you were the victim of a scam. Your life will never be the same again." Richard looked around the diner. Mary was serving a customer with that sweet smile of hers. Isabella was doing homework at a corner table, looking at him every now and then and waving. Grandma Rose was humming in the kitchen while preparing lunch. It was his family, his real life, and he was about to put all of that at risk. "Julia, I need 12 more hours before you publish." "Why?" "I need to tell the truth to the people I love." That night, after the diner closed and Grandma Rose went home, Richard asked Mary and Isabella to stay. "I need to tell you guys something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Mary felt her heart race. She had imagined this moment for months. "My real name is Richard Anderson. Until 4 months ago, I owned one of the biggest investment firms in the country." The silence that followed was deafening. "What do you mean?" Mary finally managed to speak. "My brother conned me. He stole everything I built over 15 years. Forged documents, transferred money, left me with debts and lawsuits." You're rich?" asked Isabella with wide eyes. "I was. Now I have nothing but the clothes on my back." Mary stood up from her chair, visibly shaken. "Why didn't you tell us before?" "Because I was afraid you'd see me differently." "Differently how?" "Like someone who was using you, hiding out, playing poor." Mary started pacing back and forth, processing the information. "You mean all these months you've been lying to us?" "Not lying, omitting." "It's the same thing," Mary exploded. "You made fools of us. We felt sorry for you. We gave you food, a job, affection. And you knew the whole time it was temporary." "It wasn't temporary. It never was. I fell in love with you guys." "Fell in love? Or just had fun playing poor?" Mary's words cut Richard like a knife. He saw in her eyes the same distrust he used to see in investors' eyes when a deal seemed too good to be true. "Mary, please, let me explain properly." "Explain what?" That you're getting your rich guy life back and leaving? It's not exactly the opposite. Tomorrow, a report is coming out that's going to expose my brother. I'm going to get my money back, but I don't want that life anymore. I want to stay here with you too. Oh, how convenient. Now that you're going to be rich again, you want to play poor family. Isabella, who'd been quiet up until then, finally spoke up. Mom, stop yelling. Isabella, go home. Now. No! You guys are fighting over money, but money doesn't matter. What do you mean it doesn't matter? Mary turned to her daughter. He lied to us. He didn't lie. He just didn't say something that wasn't important. How is that not important? Isabella stood up and got between the two adults. Because the Rick I know is the Rick who plays with me, who teaches me stuff, who hugs you when you're sad. If he has money, or doesn't, he's still the same person. The 6-year-old's words echoed through the diner like a sermon. Mary felt tears welling up. You don't understand, Isabella. People lie. Men promise things and then they leave. But Rick isn't like my dad. Rick stayed when I was sick, remember? Rick worked Saturdays and Sundays to help Grandma Rose. Rick cried when he saw my drawing of the family. Richard knelt down to Isabella's level. Thanks for defending me, little one. But your mom is right. I should have told the truth from the start. Then tell it now. Tell the whole truth. Richard looked at Mary, who had sat back down but kept her arms crossed and her face closed off. When I met, you guys, I was at rock bottom. It wasn't just the money I'd lost. It was my faith in humanity, in family, in love. I thought everyone was just like my brother, selfish, greedy, a backstabber. He sat down in a chair next to them. You guys showed me I was wrong, that there are still good people in the world. People who share their bread even when they're not sure if they'll have any for themselves. People who offer a home to a stranger. People who love without expecting anything in return. Mary wiped away a tear, but still didn't say a word. I fell in love with this life, Mary. With the simplicity, the truth, the family I found here. Yeah, I can get my money back, but I don't want that empty life I had before. Then what do you want? I want to use the money to do good, to help people like you, to build something real, with purpose. And us? Where do we fit into this story? Richard stood up and got closer to her. You are the story. You're the reason for everything. I want to marry you, Mary. I want to adopt Isabella. I want us to be a real family. Mary finally looked him in the eye. How can I trust you after all this? By giving me a chance to prove it. Rick? Isabella tugged on the hem of his t-shirt. Are you really going to stay forever? If your mom lets me, forever and a day. Mary stayed silent for a few minutes that felt like an eternity. Finally, she sighed. Okay, but there's one condition. What is it? No more lies. Never again. If we're going to try this, it has to be the whole truth. Promised. Isabella squealed with joy and hugged them both. Now we're a real family. The next morning, Julia's report was plastered on the front page of the New York Herald. Millionaire businessman lives in poverty after brother's scam. The article told the whole story. Frank's scam, the shell companies, Richard's life at the diner. The diner's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, lawyers, investors, everyone wanted to talk to Richard. But he decided to give just one interview to Global News Network, sitting right next to Mary and Isabella. Mr. Anderson, how does it feel knowing you're going to get your fortune back? I feel grateful to have discovered that true wealth isn't in the bank. It's right here, he said, pointing to Mary and Isabella. And you too? How do you feel finding out that the guy working at the diner was actually a millionaire? Mary smiled and took Richard's hand. We found out that it doesn't matter how much money someone has. What matters is the person's character. And you, Isabella, what do you think about all this? Isabella looked at the cameras with the seriousness of an adult. I think people worry too much about money, but they forget what's really important. And what is really important to you? Family, friendship, and chocolate ice cream. The whole TV crew laughed. But Richard and Mary knew she was speaking the absolute truth. In the following weeks, Richard's life turned upside down again, but this time for the better. With the evidence collected by Julia, a joint federal task force launched Operation Broken Trust, arresting Frank and everyone involved in the scheme. Richard's lawyers managed to track down and freeze all the offshore accounts. Millions of dollars were recovered, along with the company assets that had been illegally transferred. But Richard kept his word. 50% of the recovered amount went to the Isabella Foundation, a social fund that he created to help small business owners in vulnerable situations. The first beneficiary was, obviously, Grandma's kitchen. Grandma Rose almost fainted when Richard showed up with the purchase documents for the entire building. "My son, this can't be true." "It is true, Grandma Rose. And there's more. We're going to renovate everything, expand the kitchen, and create a space for local kids to have free meals." "But why? Why do all this?" Richard looked at Isabella, who was coloring at a nearby table. "Because a very wise little girl taught me that sharing is caring." The renovation of Grandma's kitchen took 3 months. When it reopened, it was a completely transformed space, twice as big, with colorful decorations made by the neighborhood residents themselves, a playroom for the children, and a free meal program for needy families. Mary was promoted to general manager and took a management course sponsored by the Isabella Foundation. Grandma Rose stayed on as head chef, but now she commanded a team of 12 employees. Richard moved into a simple house 2 blocks from the diner. No penthouse apartments or imported cars. A 3-bedroom house with a backyard, where Isabella could play and Mary could have her vegetable garden. 6 months after the report, on a Sunday afternoon, Richard was in the yard, setting up a swing for Isabella when Frank appeared at the gate. He was wearing a gray suit from the public defender's office and had the gaunt face of someone who had lost weight in prison. "I got out on parole for cooperating with the justice system." "Hey, bro." Richard stopped what he was doing and approached the gate, but didn't open it. "What do you want, Frank?" Talking, apologizing, trying to explain. "There's nothing to explain. You stole everything I built." "I know. And I regret it every single day." "Regret doesn't bring back 15 years of my life." Frank hung his head. "I was jealous, Richard. You were always the successful brother, the family's pride and joy, the son who made it. I was just the little brother living in your shadow. So you decided to destroy me. I thought if I had everything you had, I'd be happy. But I wasn't. Not for a single day." Richard watched his brother for a few seconds. There was something different about him. The arrogant look had given way to genuine humility. "So now what? What do you want?" "I want my family back. I want to try to be a real brother to you." "Rick, who's out there?" Mary appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on a dish towel. "My brother." Mary walked over and studied Frank with a critical eye. "Are you the one who stole everything from him?" "Yes, ma'am." "And what are you doing here?" Frank hesitated, then answered honestly. "To ask for a chance to make things right." Isabella came running from the backyard, sweaty and with messy hair. "Rick, did you finish my swing?" "Not yet, little one. I'll finish it in a bit." Isabella noticed the stranger at the gate. "Who's he?" "That's my brother Frank." Isabella studied Frank with that peculiar curiosity only children have. "You're the bad man from my story." Frank's eyes went wide. "What story?" "The story I always draw. There's a bad man who steals money from good people, but in the end, the police catch him." "Isabella." Richard tried to intervene, but she kept going. "But in the story, after he goes to jail, he feels sorry and says sorry and becomes a good person." "And what happens to him at the end of your story?" Frank asked, clearly moved. "He helps the good people be even happier, and everyone forgives him because forgiving makes your heart grow." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of a car approaching. It was Julia, who now visited the family regularly since she started dating Mary's cousin. "Hi, everyone." "Wow, why is the vibe so heavy?" "Julia, this is Frank, Richard's brother." Mary introduced him. Julia's eyes widened. "Frank? That Frank?" "Yes," Frank replied. "And you must be the journalist who exposed my scheme." "Exactly. How's prison treating you?" "It's educational," Julia smiled. There was something in Frank's tone that suggested sincerity. "You know," she said, turning to Richard, "during the whole investigation, one thing caught my attention." "What?" "Your brother could have disappeared with the money forever, but he didn't. He stayed in the country, kept the companies running, almost as if he was waiting for you to find out." Richard frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Subconsciously, maybe but part of him wanted to be caught. He wanted you to get everything back. Frank lowered his head. It's true. Deep down, I knew I couldn't live with this guilt forever. Then why did you do it? Mary asked. Because I'm an idiot. Because I confused money with happiness. Because I thought if I had what Richard had, I'd be respected like he was. And now? Richard asked. Now I know respect isn't bought, it's earned. And I've got a lot of work ahead of me. Isabella let go of Mary's hand and walked up to the gate. Do you want to come in for some lemonade? Mommy made fresh lemonade. Isabella, he can't. Richard started to speak, but the little girl cut him off. Rick, you always say everyone deserves a second chance. It's true. But then why can't your brother have one too? The relentless logic of a 6-year-old left everyone speechless. Frank had tears in his eyes. Richard looked at Mary, who shrugged as if saying, It's your call. He looked at Julia, who nodded encouragingly. He looked at Isabella, who was smiling with that innocence that touched his heart. All right, come on in. But if you step out of line even once, there won't be a second chance. Understood? In the following months, Frank proved he was serious. He got a job at an NGO helping ex-convicts reintegrate into society. He lived in a simple studio apartment, and every weekend, he'd show up at Richard's house to help with chores. Isabella adopted him as Uncle Frank and had fun teaching him things only a child can teach, like how to tie shoelaces, how to build sandcastles, how to see shapes in the clouds. Uncle Frank, did you know that if you apologize from your heart, people always forgive you? Not always, Isabella. Yes, always. Look, my Rick forgave you because he saw you were truly sorry. Frank looked at Richard, who was setting up the grill for Sunday lunch. Are you sure he forgave me? I am, because forgiveness is like love. When it's real, you can feel it. 1 year after the brothers reunited, Richard threw a party in his backyard. It wasn't anyone's birthday. It wasn't a holiday. It was just a celebration of life. Everyone was there. Mary and Isabella, Grandma Rose and the whole team from Grandma's kitchen, Julia and Mary's cousin Frank and his new girlfriend, a psychologist he'd met at the NGO, the neighbors, and some families helped by the Isabella Foundation. While the kids played on the swing set Richard had finally managed to finish, the adults chatted on the porch, eating barbecue and drinking cold beer. Rick! Isabella walked up to him, tugging on the hem of his shirt. Can I ask a question? Of course, little one. Are you happy? The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Richard looked around, Mary laughing at one of Frank's jokes, Grandma Rose telling stories from her youth, kids running through the yard, the smell of roasted meat in the air. You know, Isa, 2 years ago I thought I knew what happiness was. I thought it was having lots of money, expensive cars, a big apartment. And now? Now I know happiness is this, right here. It's having people who truly love you. It's making a difference in others' lives. It's waking up every day knowing you have a purpose. What is your purpose? Richard knelt down to her level. My purpose is to be the best father, husband, and brother I can be. It's using everything I've learned to help other people. It's building a better world for you to grow up in. Isabella smiled and hugged him tight. Thank you for letting me be your daughter. Thank you for letting me be your dad. That night, after everyone had left and Isabella had fallen asleep, Richard and Mary sat on the porch, looking at the stars. What are you thinking about? She asked. About how funny life is. 2 years ago I had everything, yet I had nothing. Today I have everything because I learned what really matters. And what really matters? Love, family, purpose, and a 6-year-old girl who taught me that sharing is caring. Mary laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. You know what I love most about all this? What? That our story isn't about a millionaire who lost everything and got it back. It's about a man who lost his way and found happiness. And are you happy? Completely. For the first time in my life. Completely. They stayed there, holding each other, listening to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirping, cars passing on the street, the distant laughter of young people at a nearby party. They were the sounds of a normal, simple, real life, and it was everything they needed. 5 years later, the Isabella Foundation had grown exponentially. It now had headquarters in 12 U.S. states and had already helped over 5,000 small entrepreneurs. Grandma's Kitchen had become a social franchise with 28 units spread across the country. Richard, now 43 years old, divided his time between the presidency of the foundation and his family. Mary had finished business school and was the executive director of the organization. Isabella, at 11 years old, was a smart and determined girl who already knew she wanted to follow in her parents' footsteps. She participated in all the foundation's meetings, where she had the right to speak, but not to vote, and she always surprised the adults with her observations. Frank had become the national coordinator of the foundation's social reintegration program. He was married to the psychologist and had a 2-year-old daughter whom Isabella pampered like a living doll. "Daddy," Isabella said one Saturday morning while having breakfast in the backyard, "can I ask you a serious question?" "Of course, my love. Do you regret losing all that money?" Richard stopped chewing his toast and looked at his daughter. "Why do you ask that?" "Because yesterday at school, the teacher said, you used to be very rich and that you lost everything. So I started thinking, if you hadn't lost the money, would you have met me?" The question caught Richard off guard. Mary stopped pouring the coffee and paid attention to the conversation. "That's a very smart question, Isa. And what's the answer?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "You know, little one, before losing the money, I lived in a bubble. I only hung out with rich people like me. I only went to expensive places. I only cared about making more and more money. Kind of like Scrooge McDuck. And people like me never went to a diner like Grandma Rose's. So no, I never would have met you guys." "So you don't regret it?" "Not even a little bit. Because losing that money made me gain something much more valuable. A family." Isabella smiled, satisfied, and went back to eating her cereal. "I knew it. Because money runs out, but family is forever." Richard and Mary exchanged emotional glances. Even after 5 years, Isabella continued to surprise them with her wisdom. That same afternoon, the family was at the park when Isabella asked another question. "Daddy, when I grow up, can I be the president of the Isabella Foundation? If you study hard and prepare yourself?" "Of course you can." "And can I change something?" "What would you like to change?" Isabella thought seriously, as she always did before speaking. "I want the foundation to help not just people who need money, but also people who need a family." "What do you mean?" "Orphaned kids, lonely seniors, people who have money but nobody to love." Richard felt a lump in his throat. His daughter, at just 11 years old, had already grasped life's most important lesson. The true wealth lies in human connection. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. So, when I turn 18, can we start?" "Actually," Mary said, coming closer, "we can start sooner than that. How about we adopt a little brother or sister for you?" Isabella's eyes lit up. "Really? Can I have a brother?" "If you want to. What if we find a child who needs a family?" "Yes, I want that. I want to teach them everything you guys taught me." 3 months later, the family grew with the arrival of Peter, a 4-year-old boy who had lost his parents in a car accident. Isabella took on the role of big sister with the same dedication her parents had shown her. "Peter, do you want me to tell you a secret?" she asked one night while helping him brush his teeth. "What is it?" "Our daddy used to be very rich, but he lost everything. Do you know why?" "Why?" "So he could find us. Because sometimes we need to lose one thing to gain something much better." Peter, with the simple logic of a 4-year-old, asked, "And what's better than money?" "Family," Isabella answered without hesitating. "Family is always better than money." From the next room, Richard and Mary heard the conversation and smiled. Their daughter had learned the most valuable lesson in life, that love is the only wealth that, when divided, multiplies infinitely. That night, before going to sleep, Richard wrote in his journal, a habit he had developed during his hardest months. "Today marks exactly 5 years since I walked into Grandma's kitchen, thinking I had lost everything. I didn't know I was about to find everything. Isabella taught me that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we share. Mary showed me that true love isn't based on what we have, but on who we are. And Peter reminds me every day that there is always room for more love in our lives. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't change a thing. Every moment of pain, every day of uncertainty, every tear shed was worth it, because it brought me here, to this simple, true life, full of purpose. Because I discovered that we don't need millions to be millionaires. We just need hearts open to loving and being loved. And that is a wealth no one can steal." And so, Richard Anderson's story came to an end, or rather, to a beginning, because some stories don't end. They just transform into legends that inspire other people to discover their own riches. The man who one day had lost everything to discover what really mattered now had a family, a purpose, and a life full of meaning. And it all started with a 6-year-old little girl who offered her snack to a sad stranger in a diner. Because sometimes the biggest miracles come wrapped in the smallest gestures. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and share it with people who need. To remember that the true wealth of life isn't in banks, but in the hearts of those we love. Tell us in the comments which moment moved you the most and where you are watching from. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until the next story that will touch your soul.